Hello, welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. We have a serious subject today. Is Pennsylvania doing enough to protect its children from sexual and physical abuse? That question was studied by a task force formed following the high-profile abuse case involving Jerry Sandusky. After the group presented its recommendation, the House Children and Youth Committee got to work. More than a dozen bills to strengthen our laws and better protect our children were passed out of the committee and also passed by the full House. Here to tell us more about these efforts is the current chair of the House Children and Youth Committee, my good friend and colleague, Representative Kathy Watson from Bucks County. Kathy, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Kate.
It's good to have you here, and I want to start out by letting our viewers know a little bit about you. You and I have been serving the legislature for a while, but I think in your work as chairman of Children and Youth, some of your past experience, including being a mom, serving on the school board, being a school teacher too,
yes,
are all relevant. So can you tell the folks back home a little bit about yourself so that they get to know you too?
Well, we've known each other for a very long time, and we always laugh because when we got to Harrisburg, we came in at the same time. Right. And you remember they would mix up, and certainly to the audience if they're looking, we look just alike. They would mix us up, and I would call me Kate and you Kathy.
We weren't used to women in those days.
No, they were not. So we think we've cured everybody of that when they know the difference between us. You're right, I am a mother, very proudly, of a grown son. And I did serve on the Central Bucks School Board. I worked in county government, and I also was a classroom teacher. I taught high school English, and then volunteered my time with the Central Bucks District, where I used to tutor in my son's elementary school and do things like that. So obviously I have an interest, a vested interest in protecting children. It's interesting because now I am chairman of Children and Youth, but I did spend the first 12 years of being here as a member of the Aging and Older Adult Services Committee.
And you had a very well regarded bill involving teenage drivers and increasing time behind the wheel before they actually get their licenses too.
And I worked on that. So I always worked with children, but it wasn't, I'll say, codified into a committee. But I did my work in the aging, and I always said seeding my future and working on aging issues, because I have a large number of over 55 age-restricted communities in my legislative district. So I thought,
it's right across County Line Road
yes,
from mine,
from
basically.
Yours. So yes, two different counties, and a Kate and a Kathy, but we are right there together. When I'm the new chairman of Children and Youth, and when I got the job, it was right when the task force on child protection was producing their report after a year of study. And they had really top-notch people on that committee based on what had happened with Jerry Sandusky. And I guess I've heard people say, oh no, this is, Pennsylvania laws were bad, they didn't work, whatever. They did work. What I tell people is we need to understand that particularly when it comes to child protection, our laws should be what I call organic. That is, they grow and they change, because sadly, predators and perpetrators change what they do to entice children. Or who would have envisioned the scenario of a Jerry Sandusky and having an organization where he was revered because he raised money, he was involved with them.
For children.
Yes, for children, and people correctly sent their children there, and in effect he was using it as an opportunity for really bad behavior.
Let's stop for a second. I have read that Pennsylvania's reported incidence of child abuse is much lower than the rest of the nation, and it isn't because we're better at that sort of a thing than
it
the
was
rest of the
really
nation.
Because the standard was so high that when you talked to the lawyers, when you talked to the judges, when you talked to child protection workers, all the people involved and the police, they said the way the standards were written, they couldn't get a conviction, and everybody in the courtroom knew that this individual was the perpetrator and that he had abused this child, and the pediatrician was there to testify with pictures. But the way the standard was written, and you're an attorney, so you know how that can be.
Words matter.
Words matter. They do to English teachers too, but they really do in your business. You couldn't get the conviction. And that's what they came, and that's what the task force report said. We need to, and it isn't as if we're relaxing the law or whatever. We're making the words, I'll say, better. We are enhancing the law, and we're taking into account how times have changed.
All right, now one of the package actually became law already, and that had specifically to do with Penn State and the NCAA. What's that bill about?
Well, that was Act 1 of, I guess, 2013. And what that does, you remember that the NCAA was leveling penalties, monetary
Something
penalties.
like $60 million, I think.
Correct. So what we wanted was a law that said, you know what, if that holds, because there's been a court case that they're not allowed to do that, if that holds, then that money must be deposited into an endowment fund in the Pennsylvania State Treasury. And then it will only be used for Pennsylvania, and we hope for things related to preventing child abuse.
Not for the general fund.
No, not for the general fund. It's all restricted, but it's certainly not going out to be used in Nebraska, this and that. The NCAA covers the country. But if that's the case, and if it is legal for them to levy those fines and they hold, then it has to be done that it's worked, the money goes into that state.
All right, so Governor Corbett signed that bill into law, and it became Act 1 of 2013. But it's still probably in court as to whether or not the NCAA will abide by it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but you've got a whole package of bills that you moved through your committee. I remember we voted for them on the floor, and they're now in the Senate. Can you tell us a little bit about what those bills would do if they become law?
Okay. It's a whole package, and I have to give credit as we go on, though, to Representative Marsico and the Judiciary Committee. Because when we sat down and looked, by the way, the task force report produced the end of November 2012. We start to work in January of this year, of 13.
Right.
And we got all the bills written and done in either Judiciary Committee or Children and Youth, depending upon really the subject matter of the particular bill.
If they were criminal, they probably went to Judiciary.
They went to Judiciary. So, but we worked together with the idea that, you know, we would get this done, and we would get, I set the timeline. I said, we have to get this finished by the time we break for the summer. I wanted everything done between January and June 30th, which they kept.
That's a very fast time schedule for legislation.
It is very fast, but if you're an ex-teacher, you know how that goes. You set up your timeline, you've got lesson plans, and yes, that hand gesture was quite appropriate. I'm going, we have to get this done. We held lots of hearings. We had constant meetings with different stakeholders to produce a whole package. At the center of the package is House Bill 716. Done by a colleague of mine, Representative Petrie. And that's really, I'm sorry, 726.
726.
Yes. Because that's
Scott Petrie is another Bucks County representative.
and also an attorney. And
also
Scott
a lawyer,
does
right.
a lot of work with children's issues. So he and I used to sit around in either his office or mine and talk about the children's issues and what was going on and things we knew about in Bucks and how do we.
What does House Bill 726 do, or what would it do if we could get it into law?
It changes that definition. If we get it into law, it will make it, and I hate saying easier because it would imply that, but it will make convictions more likely for those who are really guilty of child abuse.
In other words, our current definition
is so
let some people who actually did abuse children off the hook.
Absolutely it did.
Okay.
Absolutely it did
so
when you
what
talk
will
to
this
them.
one do?
So this has, let me tell you things that it says. It gets down to defining it as if you intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly do any of the following. If you cause bodily injury to a child. Pediatricians wanted this. They said you need to lower, the way the wording is, lower the standard.
Make it bodily injury instead of something more explicit.
Right. It doesn't mean that if you smack your child because, or spank them, you're going to go to jail and whatever. Absolutely not. But we saw the pictures and the things that come into pediatricians, and they know.
They're
if you
horrible.
see the parent's handprint on the child's face, and this is a 12-month-old, a year-old baby, something's wrong. We saw it where the marks went through the diaper and everything and onto the child's backside. Something's very wrong here.
They're hitting them too hard.
Absolutely.
If at all, but certainly way too hard.
obviously causing sexual abuse or exploitation of a child. And we, again, in that one, of course they had laws about sexual abuse, but we changed it in effect to update it. What went on in the Sandusky, what they call the grooming aspect. Where
people didn't realize that before a child is molested, the molester often befriends them and tries to get their trust and brings them along.
And the trust of the parent.
And the trust of the parents.
And that's what was so terrible in that. And that's why you had...
And they do get the trust.
And they do. They get all that. So we talked about the grooming, and that's listed as one, and explaining that in this definition. Now, let's be honest. 10 years ago, I certainly wouldn't have. I don't think you would. We didn't understand that. We've come a long way in understanding
how these things happen.
How these things happen and how they work. And I like to say to people, it was awful, it was terrible, it's life determining, but we have to make something good come out of it.
Right.
Or it's more horrific than even we thought. So the idea was that they would do this report, this committee. We looked at it and said, good stuff, a blueprint, we'll do it. I just had word from the Senate, and I'll go back to the bills themselves, but we got all our bills out of the House over to the Senate so they could work, and they've been meeting with us over the summer because they have a package of bills. So we want to see, well, where do we disagree? Where do we agree in our definition that regardless whether you do, Senator so-and-so's bill or Representative Petrie's bill, we're going to get to the same objectives.
I know you feel this way, but if you don't mind who gets the credit, you can get an awful lot done here.
My motto has been since I got here, and I've always said in life, I don't need the credit, I just need to get my way. Now, I don't really mean my personal way, but I always use that. But yeah, I don't need the credit. But what's in the bills, that every word has been parsed and done and met with stakeholders. We want to make sure those things work out.
All right, so we're going to change the definition. What else are we planning to do?
Well, we're going to, we include some exceptions, so we're more specific in the definition of what counts as child abuse, because what we heard from both caseworkers and actually even from parents who said, kind of as we interviewed people, spell it out. So we have not, one of those inclusive but not all inclusive. We talk about a list: kicking, biting, throwing, burning, stabbing, or cutting a child in a manner that endangers the child is a form of child abuse. And I know most people are sitting there and going, well, yeah, of course it is. But you'd be surprised. So we spell things out. If you
well, what about a spanking? I know there are parents sitting there right now thinking, I spanked my child when he, I don't know, put his hand in the cookie jar, took some stuff, whatever.
Right.
Is that child abuse?
No. And we're careful about that it's not. But if indeed you are forcefully striking a child, particularly under the age of 1.
Okay, so you're reading the exact language so that
That is correct, so that you know. And really, we want everybody to know. And in fact, if we just sort of digress from the bills for a minute.
For heaven's sakes, if you strike a child under the age of 1, you could kill them.
That's correct. Same thing with shaking a child under the age of 1. We're specific. We have one in there called interfering with breathing of a child. And I had a dad say to me, wait a minute, if he's acting up in the store and screaming at the top of his lungs, and I go, is that considered child abuse? Can somebody look at me and report me for child abuse? And we said no. And I guess the chairman of the task force, who happens to be a district attorney, said no, but if you do one of these and then pinch off the child's nose so they can't breathe, I know you think nobody would do that, but it's happened. Yeah, if you're interfering with the breathing of a child or putting a pillow over that child's mouth so the child can't breathe at all, the mouth and nose.
What about these crazy parents who recently were discovered having chained the 10-year-old to a radiator or something for days? I can't imagine it. Why anybody would do that, but it does happen.
It does happen. I read about a case somewhere in Pennsylvania and these were 2 college-educated parents, man and a woman married to each other. They didn't want to hit their child, so what they did, the child was 3, and they had done this for quite a while till finally reported, and they really didn't understand why people were saying this was wrong. They locked the child in a closet, but they gave the child a pillow and a blanket, so they didn't think, up to 12 hours if the child misbehaved.
12 hours in a closet?
Overnight. The child had misbehaved at bedtime, so they put him in the closet. And they said, but we didn't hit him. Heaven knows what that child's going to grow up with, but
All right.
Yes, I
Well,
think
give me some more highlights, because then we're going to have to take a break in just a moment. So just give me some more highlights and we'll come back and talk about other bills.
the basic bill that will fix a lot of what you heard that people say the law didn't work
The
and allowed,
definitions.
and the definition. Then we also had to go back and say we had to protect people if they report suspected abuse, but it's done in good faith. We give them kind of a whistleblower, the same way we do with other things. We give them a shield that you can't, if you're, somehow they're in employment, we can't get rid of them or fire them. Also, we needed to update Department of Public Welfare. And pediatricians have said, wait a second, do you know what it's like? I have to report it, but they're forms and whatever. Can I use what we have now, electronic reporting?
Or a phone. Can't you call
Well,
someone?
they do on a phone, but then they're hanging on. And what they said, I have other patients to see, but if I can, in effect, keyboard it in, because many of our doctors now walk around, with the wireless keyboard with them, because they're writing down what happened
Well,
to
they're
you.
keeping their medical records that way.
That's it. So they do
Sure.
the same thing. So we have a bill that takes care of that and makes DPW establish procedures for secure and confidential use of the web, but they can file reports. That allows them to file them faster. And
Should help the child
it
faster.
helps the child faster and gets to what's really going on or help that's needed.
All right, so that's another good proposal. Let's take a quick break. Legislative Report will return in just a moment. My guest is Representative Kathy Watson, and we're talking about the legislative response to the terrible Sandusky sex abuse scandal.
Did you know? Since 1905, the State Museum of Pennsylvania has been offering an interactive and educational experience of the state's vast history and heritage. Each year, the museum is a playground for more than 135,000 schoolchildren and adults exploring culture and history of their state and country. Memorial Hall features a larger-than-life, 18-foot-high bronze statue of the Commonwealth founder, William Penn, standing right in front of a monumental memorial. The Battle of Gettysburg took its charge. With more visitors than almost any other Pennsylvania museum, you're probably wondering, what's so exciting? It may be the 4 floors of interactive and displayed exhibits ranging from the Earth's beginning to present day, or the planetarium, where visitors can witness the wonders of galaxies and stars beyond Earth's surface during one of the many shows offered throughout the year. Perhaps it's pretending to put on your lab coat as you view the uncovering of fossilized bones in the Dino Lab interactive exhibit. It offers a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see millions of year-old fossils. Be prepared for exhibits just like ones in the State Museum. Or it's visiting a constant favorite, the Mammal Hall, with full-scale displays of Pennsylvania's wildlife and lifelike dioramas. But the real reason for the State Museum's popularity, the many adventures around every corner, and something for all visitors to experience and remember. Now you know.
Welcome back to Legislative Report. Our topic today is strategies and efforts that Pennsylvania is going to be taking to protect our children from sexual and child abuse in the wake of the Sandusky scandals. Joining me is my colleague, Representative Kathy Watson from Bucks County, who is the chair of the Children and Youth Committee and is reporting on a number of bills that her committee has already passed out, that have been voted out of the House and are now in the Senate. I'm particularly interested that the package includes an awful lot of training. Who's getting trained and what are they getting trained for?
Well, we need to say, we are talking about, we've changed the definition, we'll fix this, we'll make it better. But you need people, and some people are required to be what we call mandated reporters.
What does that mean for the viewer who doesn't know what that means?
They are, it's limited to people who are 18 or older, and they are listed, for instance, a teacher or clergy, employees of child care providers. They're mandated reporters.
Required.
They are required to report it. I'd like to think later, and we can talk another show, we can talk about if we get all this through, doing more of a public relations campaign, because I keep saying, while child abuse may be something of yours and my business because we make laws, child protection is everybody's. Anybody
Right.
watching, we can look after and do a better job of watching out for children, and then perpetrators don't have as many places to hide and try things because we're paying attention.
Now, many
But
of
they
these
need to be
bills,
educated to
exactly.
know it.
Many of these bills are training bills. So who's going to get trained and what are we going to teach them?
Everybody who's the mandated reporter, and we've expanded that, we need to train them.
Teachers,
Correct.
priests, ministers, all
And
those
actually,
people.
there's even a bill that talks about that in the school system, in age-appropriate way, but they would teach through health and whatever. I guess the concept that when our children were little, we talked about a good touch and a bad touch.
Right, I remember.
But making children aware too of things that are not right,
and that people shouldn't be able to do
and
to
do
them.
this, and kind of make them aware. You don't want to take and rob them of their childhood and their innocence, but you do want to make them a little more aware of their surroundings. So that's in there too. But the effort will be on training more of the adults. One of the things that I talked about even with Secretary Mackworth, it's not in a bill, it's something we'd like to do after, is put things on our DPW website that you and I could go to and look and read about a situation and say, you know, is that child abuse? Should I be calling Childline?
If we have a bad feeling about something.
Where do we go? And do we call Childline? Do we call the police? What do we do?
I do know that the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, PCAR, is working on a similar effort.
Yes, I think we just need to, as I said, from this Sandusky tragedy, that's the only word I can think of, or horror, we've got to make something good out of it, make good things come out of it because it was so ugly and so bad. And I think we can do that. We will update our laws to better fit the environment we live in now.
More people report.
More people report.
Train more people to see
so
the
they
signs.
understand and train all of us. And I guess my pet project will be to try to get us all aware of child protection is everybody's business.
Grooming. Who knew that that was actually, you know, leading to child abuse?
No.
You might think that the person just happened to be good with kids, but there's more to it than that.
And yet at the same time, I don't want to make it so suspect that because, you know, the Boy Scout leader is nice to
Little
the
League
kids
coach.
or the Little League coach or whatever, there's
after the
something
game.
wrong. I mean, for 95%, and I'm not sure of my percentage, but I'd like to think that, they're fine. But we just need more awareness to recognize when it's not fine.
All right, now let me just stop you there because I noticed that at least one of the bills deals with people who view child pornography. And that is already a crime, of course, in Pennsylvania, but it enhances the penalties, making it a more serious crime. What does that have to do? What does looking at child pornography have to do with child abuse?
Because there have been studies done that have shown that for a significant number of those who look at regularly child pornography, it's on their computers. They didn't look at one time to see what it was and were so horrified they didn't, but regularly, they will progress and they are more likely to progress to child abuse.
Okay.
So that's the idea from the bill behind the enhancement.
It's already a crime because we don't want to create an industry or foster an industry where children are abused for the pleasure of people watching.
Correct.
You know, but we're enhancing it under your package of bills.
Yes, that one's came out of judiciary actually.
Okay.
But yes, but that's the idea because they know there is a connection there. And again, it's anything that we can do to just make the world a safer place for children and for parents to raise their children. When somebody said, what's this all about? And they said, oh, are you trying to, you mentioned earlier, are you trying to take the place of you know, the parent?
Right.
in
People do
doing
worry
it?
about that.
And absolutely not. What we're trying to do is make it a little easier in some ways to be a parent and to raise a child. Because when I think of today, and if you have a small child or a grandchild or whatever, you're really worried and think the world seems a scarier place than when you and I,
right.
We both have boys.
Right.
So when our boys were little, it didn't seem quite as scary as it can be now. So I see that as our role to make it better for families, better for parents, and also clear cut, as in the basic bill on child abuse, clear cut. What's abuse
People
and
know
what isn't.
where the line is.
Yes.
Right.
I would tell you too, we talked with some of the stakeholders who are out there trying to encourage parents who get to be parents biologically but go, I don't know a thing about this. I don't know how to raise a child. I didn't babysit or I didn't have other siblings that I had to take care of or whatever. You know, I never paid attention and here I am with this child. And we talk about that in this child protection's everybody's business. Some of the rest of us who've been through it need to look to mentor, to offer help and say, you know, you can talk to me anytime about it. Or programs that are there.
We have programs like that through the Children's Trust Fund, which I think
Yes.
you're probably a member of, and
Yes,
I did serve on that board for a while. There was a program in Philadelphia, I believe it was at Einstein, where a teenage mother and a significant person in her life, who's most likely her mother, were given classes in how to handle babies and demands, which are
and
pretty
organizations
incompatible with
like
teenage
the Y
demands.
and different groups like that have programs. But it also could be something as simple as a neighbor who just says, you know, if you ever have any questions or whatever, I've been through this, I raised 3 or 4 or 5, I'd be happy to help you. And I know times are busy and people don't, but what we've learned when we read some things, that makes a difference. In other words, we could help people. Think of that couple, you know, owned their own home, college educated, all the things we think, whether it makes you a good parent or not, I'm not convinced. But in any event, and here they were locking their 3-year-old in the closet
All
up
by
to 12
himself.
hours. But they gave him a pillow and a blanket, so that was okay. And they didn't hit him, so they thought they were being good. All right.
Well, let's talk about that.
I mean, really, maybe a neighbor, somebody working with them, if they knew, could say something. In other words, you can head things off if people feel they have somebody to go to. We've become.
But that is part of it. I mean, I was going to bring that up. I mean, sometimes a neighbor worries, or a neighbor notices, or a neighbor thinks. You know, that's a tough situation. Because especially in suburbia, both of us represent suburban districts, it's just not, your neighbors are not supposed to be nosy and they're not supposed to be telling you how to raise your children.
Correct.
What do you do if you're the neighbor and you're worried about some child?
You could call the child line and ask, because you have trained people at the other end who will ask you questions.
So you
and
can
make
give them the
suggestions.
facts, that's what's
Correct.
making you nervous, and they would tell you.
They would tell you some things to do, which doesn't mean calling the police or whatever. I think there are times when you wait for the opportune moment and you just see somebody, in our case, maybe out walking or whatever, and you say, you know, the child's really cute, or what a good little girl, or whatever. And sometimes you open up a conversation where mom goes, I don't know what to do, driving me crazy, you see good, but da da da, and you get a chance to just kind of interact.
A mentor.
Yes, and so it isn't so formal as maybe mentor isn't the right word. It's just kind of being there as a friend, a significant person who's happy to help out any way they can, or maybe just an ear to listen, and then at key times offer a little free advice, because they wouldn't go to a set program.
Right.
But that's
many people
part of
won't
us.
sign up for a program like, well, tell me what else there are. Oh, maybe a dozen bills here. What else do you have
I think one of them that
in
everybody
the works?
would notice, and yet they think we've had a little bit of discussion. Well, we had a lot of discussion about it, but I think we've gotten it to where we want. And that's a bill by Representative Mao, where we expand but clean up a little bit about background checks,
Sure.
for want of a better
Yeah,
term.
background checks is something that people do think might help.
Yes, and we've learned that again, and back to Sandusky, but we start checking people, and even my goddaughter, to go on her son's class trip at the beginning of the year, you have to go through and get a background check in that school district, and then you can be a chaperone. And she can then chaperone her daughter's class because the daughter's 2 years younger or whatever.
I think most people still don't know that you can get the Megan's Law information online.
That's very true.
And so if you're worried, you should put your zip code into the Megan's Law website, and it'll tell you who's living in the neighborhood who you might be concerned about.
Right, and I actually had that experience because a woman went online, looked it up, and I was shocked. In my home township, this man was on, and I'd seen him at the shopping center, but he's on Megan's Law, and didn't the school district unknowingly put a bus stop right in front of his house?
Wow.
So, I mean, that's not the district's fault in a sense, but we worked with the districts that voluntarily, they look for things like that.
The information's available.
It is there.
And we try to get it to them. Well,
Yes.
guess what? We've run out of time. This is a big subject.
It is a very big subject.
And one we could probably talk about on another show, but that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. My guest today was State Representative Kathy Watson. If you need assistance with any state government matter, feel free to contact me at my local office in Bluebell. The address and number will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching. Join me again for Legislative Report.